Welcome back. Turn off the lights, put on your headphones, and settle in. Tonight's story begins with a fire lookout tower and 87 steps that should have ended long before the last footstep. There were 87 steps up to the cab of that fire tower, and on my 9th night alone up there, I counted 88 footsteps climbing toward me in the dark. I want to be clear about that before I tell you anything else, because everything that happened after depends on you believing it. 87 steps. I had counted them a dozen times going up and down, hauling water and propane and my own miserable body, and every single time the number came out the same. 87. But that night, lying in my cot with the lantern off and the wind pushing against the glass on all four sides, I heard something start at the bottom of the staircase and climb, one deliberate step at a time, all the way up. And it did not stop at 87. I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up to how I ended up on that mountain, because if I'd asked the right questions before I signed anything, I never would have gone. The job listing didn't even have a proper title. A friend of a friend forwarded it to me in the spring, back when I was 3 months behind on rent and willing to do almost anything that didn't require an interview. Fire Lookout, Northwest Montana, deep in the Kootenai. June through late September. You live in a 14 by 14 glass box on stilts at the top of a peak, you scan the horizon for smoke, you radio it in, and the rest of the time you're alone with the sky. The pay was bad, but the pay didn't matter. What mattered was that nobody would find me up there. And at that particular point in my life, being unfindable sounded like the closest thing to peace I could imagine. I got a call 2 days later from a district office in a town so small, the guy answering the phone also seemed to be the guy who ran the hardware store. His name was Haverson. Older voice, patient, the kind of slow talker you get in places where nobody's ever in a hurry. He asked me almost nothing about my qualifications, which should have been my first warning. He asked if I minded being alone. I said no. He asked if I slept well. I thought that was a strange thing to ask, and I said I slept fine. There was a pause on the line. Then he said, "Good. That helps." He didn't explain what it helped with. I didn't ask. The drive-in took 2 days, and the last 4 hours of it were on a forest road that wasn't really a road, just a suggestion of gravel switchbacking up through country that got emptier and taller with every mile. I remember the exact moment my phone lost service because I watched the bars die one by one like a countdown and felt something in my chest tighten. By the time I reached the trailhead, there was no signal, no other vehicle, no sound but the engine ticking as it cooled. From there, it was 1.5 miles up a footpath on foot, my pack biting into my shoulders, until the trees finally thinned and I saw it. The tower stood on the bald crown of the peak, a skeleton of gray steel with a glass room perched at the top, 40 feet in the air. The staircase zigzagged up the outside in switchbacks, landing by landing, and even from the ground it looked less like a building and more like something that had grown there, wrong and thin against the sky. Haverson had told me the tower was built in 1931 and hadn't been staffed continuously since. "Gaps in the record," he'd said. "Years where nobody wanted the post. I should have asked why. I didn't ask that either." The first week was, I'll admit, close to everything I'd hoped for. The view was staggering. 100 miles of green folding into blue, the mountains stacked to the horizon like something out of a dream you don't want to wake up from. I learned the routine fast. Up at dawn, coffee on the little propane burner, then the slow, careful sweep of the Osborne fire finder in the center of the room, turning it degree by degree, looking for the thin gray thread. That means a fire is being born somewhere out there in all that emptiness. Radio check at 9. Log entries in the green ledger the district kept in the cabinet. Long, silent afternoons. The sun going down in colors I didn't have names for. I was lonely, but it was a clean loneliness. I slept well, just like I'd promised Haverson. The ledger is where the first crack appeared. It was an old thing, water-stained, the pages soft with handling. The district used it to record weather, fire activity, whatever the lookout felt was worth noting. Most entries were dull. Wind SW10 mph. Clear. Nothing to report. I flipped back through the years out of boredom one evening, reading the handwriting of everyone who'd stood where I was standing, and somewhere around the entries from 4 summers back, the tone changed. The handwriting belonged to a woman named Reyes. She signed her full entries, first week or two, and it started normal enough. Then, about a month in, the entries got shorter, clipped, and then I found one dated in August that just said, "It uses the stairs now. Do not answer it." I read that line probably 10 times. There was nothing before it to explain what it was and nothing after it that first night I found it, because the next several pages had been torn out, not neatly, ripped close to the spine, so that only a fringe of paper remained. Whoever tore them had been in a hurry, or afraid, or both. I told myself it was a joke. Lookouts get strange up here, everybody knows that. Months alone will do things to a mind. I told myself Reyes had been messing with whoever came next, leaving a little haunted house note to spook them. It almost worked. I closed the ledger and went to bed and slept fine. That was the last night I slept fine. The footsteps started 3 nights later, and they started small. I woke, or thought I woke, to a sound down at the base of the tower. Not the wind. The wind I already knew by heart. It had 100 voices, and I'd learned all of them. This was different. This was a single, distinct impact of weight on metal, way down at the bottom of the staircase. Then a pause. Then another. 1 step up. I lay dead still and listened. 3 steps, maybe 4. Slow. Deliberate. The kind of pace a person uses when they don't want to fall in the dark, or when they're in no hurry at all because they know exactly where they're going. And then it stopped. Just stopped. Somewhere down on the lower flights, and did not come again. I lay awake until dawn with my heart going like a fist on a door. In the morning, I went down and walked the whole staircase, every landing, looking for, I don't know what. Footprints, I suppose, though the steps were bare steel and held nothing. There was nothing there. A marmot, I decided. A branch. The metal expanding as the temperature dropped. Old structures tick and groan all night. Everybody knows that too. The next night it came again, and it climbed higher. I started counting after that. I don't fully know why. I think some part of me, the part that stays calm in a crisis by turning terror into arithmetic, needed a number to hold on to. So the 3rd night I lay in the dark and I counted, and it climbed 9 steps before it stopped. The 4th night, 14. The 5th night, 22. Always starting at the very bottom. Always the same measured pace, that awful patience, weight landing on steel with a soft resonant note that I felt in my teeth. And always stopping, but stopping higher, closer, a few more steps into the tower's throat every single night. I want you to understand what this does to a person. During the day, I could almost laugh it off. The sun was up, the radio crackled with the friendly bored voices of other lookouts miles away, and the world was solid and reasonable. But as the light failed each evening, I'd feel the dread thickening in the room like water rising, and by full dark, I'd be lying rigid on that cot, doing the only thing I knew how to do, which was count. On the 8th day, I did something I should have done in my first week. I got on the radio and I asked about Reyes. There was a long silence on the channel. Long enough that I thought I'd lost the signal. Then Haverson's voice came back, slower even than usual. "Where'd you hear that name?" "It's in the ledger," I said. "She worked the tower 4 summers ago." Another silence. Then, "You're doing fine up there. Stick to your sweeps. Don't spend your nights reading that old book. It'll get in your head." And before I could say anything else, he signed off, and no matter how many times I keyed the mic after that, he didn't answer. That was the moment the fear went from a private thing to something I couldn't argue myself out of, because Haverson hadn't laughed. He hadn't said who. He He hadn't said the healthy, boring thing a normal man says when a name from 4 years ago comes up. He'd asked me where I heard it, in the voice of a man checking how much I already knew. I spent the rest of that day taking the ledger cabinet apart. It was a cheap steel cabinet bolted to the wall under the fire finder, and the ledger lived on the top shelf. But cabinets like that have a lower compartment, and mine was jammed shut with rust and disuse, and I worked at it for an hour with a screwdriver until it screeched open. Inside, under a nest of dead insects and a coil of frayed radio wire, were the torn-out pages. Reyes had ripped them out of the front book and hidden them in the bottom of the cabinet. I think she wanted them found. By exactly the kind of person who'd end up sitting where I was sitting, scared enough to go digging. I'm going to tell you what those pages said, but I need you to understand that I read them by lantern light with the sun already gone and the wind starting up, which is to say at the worst possible time, in the worst possible place, in the exact condition a person should never read something like that. The pages picked up right where the ledger had cut off. It uses the stairs now. Do not answer it. The next entry, in that same cramped hand, said she'd been hearing it for 2 weeks, that it climbed a little higher every night, that she had started counting the steps, and reading that, seeing my own private ritual written in someone else's hand 4 years before I got there. I felt the floor drop out of my stomach. She'd counted too, and she'd figured out the thing I hadn't let myself figure out yet, which was that the numbers were a countdown, because there were 87 steps, and whatever climbed them was getting closer to the top by roughly the same amount every night. And that meant there was a night coming, a specific and calculable night when it would reach the last step, and there would be nowhere higher left for it to go. Reyes had done the math. On the page in handwriting that got wilder as it went, she'd worked out how many nights she had left. And then, on the last legible page before the writing dissolved into something I couldn't read, she'd written a single line that I have not been able to get out of my head since. I finally saw it on the landing tonight, and it's wearing Dwyer's coat. I didn't know who Dwyer was, but I knew, the way you know things in your body before your mind catches up, that Dwyer was the lookout before her, and that whatever climbed those stairs had come to Reyes wearing the last person's clothes. That was the night everything I thought I understood turned inside out. Because up until then, I'd been telling myself a ghost story, a thing, a monster, something other coming up out of the dark. But if it wore the coat of the lookout who came before, then it wasn't just visiting the tower, it was of the tower. It was made from the people who'd stood where I stood. And that meant the countdown wasn't leading toward my death. It was leading toward my replacement. I did the math myself that night, sitting on the floor with the torn pages spread around me and my hands not quite steady. That night, the 8th. It had climbed to somewhere around 40 steps before it stopped. I'd been too rattled during the radio call to notice I'd stopped counting, but 40 was close. If it gained 6 or 7 steps a night, then it would reach the top of those 87 steps in a week. Maybe less. I had a week. I know what the reasonable move was. Pack up, walk the 1.5 miles down to the truck in daylight, and drive until my phone found signal and never come back. I want you to know I thought about it every single hour. But I also want you to be honest with yourself about what it's like to be genuinely, bone-deep afraid in a place with no other human being for 40 miles, where the sun sets and you are utterly alone with a thing that climbs. Fear like that doesn't make you brave, and it doesn't make you smart. It makes you small. It makes you tell yourself that you'll leave tomorrow in the light when it's safe. And then the light comes and the terror recedes just enough that leaving feels like an overreaction, like something you'd have to explain to Haverson, like admitting you couldn't handle a little metal groaning in the wind. So I stayed. God help me, I stayed. And I told myself I'd figure it out. The 9th night is the one I told you about at the start. The night it climbed 88 steps. I'd resolved to keep count no matter what. To have my data, to be scientific about my own haunting because being scientific was the only thing keeping me from screaming. So when it started at the bottom that night, that first soft toll of weight on steel, I began to count, and I counted with my eyes shut and my whole body clenched, and it climbed. 40, 50, faster than the countdown predicted, gaining ground. And I realized with a sick lurch that it wasn't holding to a schedule anymore. It was hurrying, and 60, 70, and I couldn't breathe, and 80, 83, 85, 87, the top step, the landing right outside my door, and then 88. There is no 88th step. I had counted those stairs with my own feet a dozen times. 87 steps end at the landing, and the landing ends at the door, and there is nothing above the door but the roof and the sky. But I heard the 88th footfall land, clear and heavy and close, on the inside of the door. On my side, that. The room went absolutely silent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. And in that silence I heard, just on the other side of a half-inch of wood, the sound of something breathing. Slow, wet, patient. And then a single knock. Not a bang, not a violent thing. Just one soft, almost polite knuckle against the door, and a voice that I swear on everything I have was Haverson's slow, patient drawl saying, "You said you slept fine." I did not answer it. Reyes' first line had burned itself into me. Do not answer it. I lay there with both hands clamped over my own mouth to keep any sound from escaping, and I stared at the door in the dark, and the breathing went on, and the knob. I watched the knob, turned slowly, all the way, and stopped, because I'd locked it. A cheap interior lock on a hollow door, the kind you could break with a shoulder, but it held, and whatever was out there did not force it. It just waited. All night. Sometime near dawn the breathing faded, and the weight lifted off the landing with a long metallic sigh, and I heard it descend 87 steps, exactly, counting down this time, back into the dark at the base of the tower where it lived. When the sun finally came up, I was still on the floor with my hands over my mouth, and I understood two things with perfect clarity. The first was that it could reach me now. It had run out of stairs, and it had made an 88th anyway. And that meant the rules I'd been counting on weren't rules at all, just a mercy it had decided to stop extending. The second thing was worse. The second thing was that it had spoken to me in the voice of the one man who knew I was up here, the one man on the other end of that radio, and I no longer had any idea whether Haverson was a person I could call for help or part of the thing that was hunting me. I tried the radio anyway. I was past pride by then. I keyed the mic and I said his name over and over, and Static answered, and Static, and then a click and a voice. "Morning," Haverson said. Calm. Ordinary. Exactly as I'd heard him 100 times, and exactly as I'd heard him through the door at 3 a.m. "How'd you sleep?" I couldn't answer. I sat there with the mic in my fist and my whole arm shaking. "You went digging in that cabinet," he said, and it wasn't a question. "I told you not to. Reyes told you not to in her way. Everybody tells you and nobody listens, because the kind of person who takes this job is the kind of person who's already halfway to wanting to disappear." A long pause. "It's easier if you don't fight it. I'm sorry. That's the only honest thing I've got to offer you. It's easier if you don't fight." And then he told me the rest, in that patient hardware store voice, and I understood at last what I'd walked into. The tower didn't have gaps in its staffing record because nobody wanted the job. It had gaps because it kept the people it hired. Not their bodies. Search parties had come over the decades and found the cabs empty, the doors locked from the inside, the lookouts simply gone as if they'd stepped off the edge of the world. What the tower kept was something else. The lookout before me had been Reyes. The one before her was Dwyer. And when a new one came, the last one climbed the stairs to meet them, wearing the coat or borrowing the voice. Whatever it took to get close, whatever it took to make you open the door, because it couldn't take you, not really. Not unless you let it in, not unless you answered. Reyes lasted longer than most, Hoverson said, almost gently. She figured out not to answer, held out 3 extra weeks. But you can't count forever, son. Nobody's ever counted forever. Sooner or later it's the middle of the night, and you hear a voice you love, and you're so tired and so alone, and you open the door just to see. That's all it takes. Just to see. And you? I finally got out. My voice sounded like a stranger's. What are you? The static hissed. And then he said the thing that I've carried with me every day since, the thing that made the whole architecture of it fall into place at once, all the pieces I'd been too frightened to fit together. I was the lookout in 1938, he said. I answer the phone now. I hire the next one. That's the job it gives you after you bring the tower someone new. I've been doing it a long time. A pause. You'll do it too. Once you've climbed the stairs a few hundred nights, you'll get a voice as good as mine. And some spring you'll pick up a listing forwarded by a friend of a friend from someone 3 months behind on rent who doesn't want to be found, and you'll ask them if they sleep well, and you'll be so relieved when they say yes. I threw the radio across the room. I don't remember deciding to. I just remember the crack of it against the steel wall and the pieces on the floor and the sudden total silence. And then I was moving, throwing what I could into my pack, because it was full daylight and I had told myself all along that in the light I could leave. And I could. That's the thing I need you to know. I made it out. I went down those 87 steps 2 at a time with my heart trying to climb out of my throat, and I ran the 1.5 miles down the trail so fast I fell twice and tore both palms open on the rock, and I threw myself into the truck and I drove down and down those switchbacks, watching the mountains fall away behind me. I drove until my phone screamed back to life with a week of missed nothing, and I kept driving, and I did not stop until the tower was 300 miles behind me, and the country was flat and full of people and gas stations and light. I never reported it. Who would I report it to? I quit the way you quit a nightmare, by refusing to go back to sleep. For a while I thought I'd gotten away clean. For a while the only thing wrong with me was that I couldn't be on any staircase after dark without counting the steps, without my whole body going cold at the top of the flight, waiting for one more that never came. That was 6 years ago. I'm telling you all this now because last spring I got a job listing forwarded to me by a friend of a friend. Fire lookout, it said. Northwest Montana. And I deleted it, and I felt sick for a day, and I told myself it was coincidence. Towers need lookouts, of course the listing went out again. But last week I did something I shouldn't have. I couldn't help it. I found the district's number and I called it, just to hear who'd answer, just to prove to myself that Haverson was a dead man's story I'd half invented in the dark. A young woman picked up. She sounded tired and hopeful and broke, the way I'd sounded once. She said she'd applied for the summer post and was calling to confirm, and she asked if I was the man she'd spoken to before, the older one, the slow talker who'd been so kind. And I heard myself answer her. I heard the voice that came out of my mouth, patient and warm and years older than I am, a voice I have never used in my life. I heard it ask her if she minded being alone. I heard it ask her if she slept well. And when she said yes, she sleeps just fine, I heard how relieved I was. Thank you for listening. If this story kept you on edge, subscribe and join us for more tales that blur the line between fiction and reality. Until next time, keep the lights on and never answer the voice behind the door. Good night.